We're going to be discussing minimizing error. We can't get rid of error completely, but we can at least attempt to minimize it. Now, if to hold on to truth is to be in conformity to the world around us, then when we are in error, we are cut off from the world. That is, we are cut off from reality. As Aristotle famously said, we all desire to know. Nevertheless, we have limited, weak intellects, and obtaining knowledge is often arduous. In fact, it seems we err more often than not. To err is human, as the popular expression goes. True knowledge is comparatively rare. Hi, I'm the amateur logician, and together we're going to think about ignorance, doubt, some sources of error, and what we positively need to combat error, to minimize it. So let's get started with ignorance. We can define ignorance as the absence of knowledge. Now, ignorance can be negative ignorance or privative ignorance. Now, if it's negative ignorance, it is ignorance in the sense that we have a lack of knowledge, but it's not something we absolutely need to know. If it's privative ignorance, again, it is an absence of knowledge, but here it is something we do absolutely need to know. Consider a high school teacher teaching grammar. If he or she doesn't know the rules of grammar, they would be in privative ignorance, and that is morally blameworthy. Now, for some, what is privative ignorance is just negative ignorance. For example, the math high school teacher better know his calculus, but for others, it's not absolutely necessary to know it, so they would just be in negative ignorance. So what exactly is privative ignorance is going to differ from person to person, depending on their occupation, depending on what they do, and so forth. Next, we have doubt, and doubt we can define as unresolved knowledge. We can divide this two ways at least. We have negative doubt and positive doubt. If we have negative doubt, we don't have enough evidence to claim something is true or false. We just don't know. We're completely drawing a blank. Is that true? Is that false? I have no idea. But if it's positive doubt, a proposition or theorem seems equally likely to be true or false, and we can't pick between the two because they seem equally likely. For example, maybe the agnostic believes that the arguments in favor of God's existence and the arguments against God's existence are equally good, and so he cannot pick between the two because he is in positive doubt. Not negative doubt, but positive doubt. Note that if this doubt is over privative ignorance, then we have an obligation to try to resolve the doubt and approach knowledge. It seems to me, for example, many important philosophical questions are important enough for us to address. Does God exist or not? We should attempt to answer that question, fallible though we are. Or what does it mean to be morally good? We should not be stuck in doubt over that question. We should try to answer it. Again, fallible though we are, we make errors, we make mistakes, but we should try to answer the question. Good philosophy is not about winning debates. It's an intellectual and spiritual quest wanting to obtain wisdom. And likewise, studying logic shouldn't be about winning debates. Rather, good logic is a tool to help us extend our knowledge. However, we often err in this quest. We should try to minimize error by understanding various sources of error. Learning is a process. It takes time. It's not immediate. So here are some sources of error. For example, carelessness. For example, rashness. But we can combat that, for example, with being patient. So we need patience. We need carefulness. We also need good attention. We have to focus. We have to be serious and not cavalier. We need to use our willpower to be careful. And this also requires us to make sure we are energized, so to speak, to do the intellectual task at hand, because we can get tired and worn out. There's been a lot of times, for example, when I have been rash in my judgment of a book or an argument. I didn't slow down and carefully, objectively consider the argument in hand. You might be much smarter than me and read a mathematical book very quickly or a philosophy book very quickly, but for me it takes time. I need to slow down to absorb the arguments, to absorb the proofs, to make sure I get them. It's more about quality than quantity. Who cares how many books you've read in a year or in a month? What matters is quality. Do you know those books? Do you understand them? Did you learn something from them? And that requires patience. Especially in today's day and age, with YouTube, with TikTok especially, we need to be patient. It takes patience, carefulness, and good attention to philosophically investigate various topics, to understand mathematics, to understand the arguments for or against God, to understand epistemology, to understand logic, and so forth. Another source of error is an interfering imagination. And that imagination can distort our senses. We might be taking an idea and having that dictate what we are sensing. So we're filtering things we see and observe by an idea, and that can throw us off. We don't want to do that. This also suggests, for example, that we should use our senses wisely. For example, we want to make sure our senses are in a normal state. That we're thinking about the relations between things. For example, we can misjudge the size of various things by our sight. It's not so much that our senses deceive us, but that we misjudge our senses. We misinterpret what our senses are telling us. So just because we see this tree as being very, very tiny, our senses didn't deceive us. It's our interpretation of what we're seeing. Well, that tree is very far away, so no wonder why it looks very, very small. Moreover, our senses should assist each other. We should use multiple senses when we can to verify what we are observing. Another big source of error is intellectual pride. So-called intellectuals fall into intellectual pride often, unfortunately. So many people hold on to their ideology and let the ideology dictate what they think is true. Someone might have a novel idea or relatively novel idea and not allow any kind of serious intellectual criticism of that idea. But we need to combat that. And one thing we positively need, therefore, is humility. That's a big one. We all make errors. We all make mistakes. There's always someone much smarter than we are. And there's always so much more to learn. We need humility. We have to recognize that we err. We should also recognize that we probably have some propositions in our head that are false. We need others to help us and to correct us. And the thing about humility is that it should allow us to be more open to the world around us, to learn from others and to learn from experience and to learn from data. So humility is extremely important. Another source of error can come from the emotions. And this is also often related to that intellectual pride. Especially when it comes to politics or religion, we let our emotions speak for us. So we need objectivity. We need to try to be objective. When we're reasoning with logic. We're reasoning with data, not with our emotions. But we also need courage in this world because there's so many bad ideas out there. We can be influenced by peer pressure. Our culture is flooded with stupid ideas. So to obtain knowledge really does take courage. To try to pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful requires courage. Now, things like patience, carefulness, good attention, using our senses wisely, humility, courage, and objectivity, these things fall under what has been called virtue epistemology. Because these are virtues we need to acquire in order to try to obtain knowledge. And they will help us combat error. We're always going to make mistakes. We're always going to get things wrong, but we can try to minimize them by developing these virtues. So I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com, and if you enjoyed this type of video, consider subscribing to this YouTube channel and hitting the like button. Also, I would very much appreciate it if you visit my website at amateurlogician.com. I have a lot of resources on logic and other topics. Thank you for watching, and be well.